Hello, third graders. It's math time with Ms. Jaramillo, and today we're going to take a look at our standard, which is we are going to find area of rectangles and squares using our understanding of multiplication. So let's get started with, let's take a look at what is area. Area is the number of square units needed to cover an area of space. So for example here, John just so happened to spill some water on his tile floor. In this case, we might want to know how many squares of water are being covered by this particular spill. So if we look at the spill, we could say that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 about, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares in each row. So if I were going to figure out the area of this spill, I could say that this spill is 30 square feet. Well, how do I know that? Because I have 5 rows of squares with 6 squares, or 6 tiles in this case, in each square. So since we don't have all of this one covered or all of this one covered, we're using an estimation basically. So 5 times 6 is going to give me 30 square feet. And we're going to say that these little tiles right here are feet, since most of the time that's what a floor is covered with. Now there's different ways that we can measure square units. For example, we might have a square centimeter, or a square inch, or a square foot. If you wanted to create a square foot, you could have a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot square. And if you've noticed that maybe you have tile in your home, those are more than likely 1 square foot of tile. So take a look around you and see if there's anything that you could see that might be a square foot. We also have measurements such as 1 square yard, and if you've ever seen a yardstick, it's probably longer than the length of 2 arms. And so we could have a square yard, which would be almost like covering your floor with an area rug. And they do call it an area rug, so that might give you a hint. Or you could even have a square mile or a square kilometer. So those are just some other ways that you can measure the space or the area of different objects, especially flat surfaces. So let's take this rectangle. What's the area? So in order for us to find the area, we're going to use 1-inch square tiles. So if we take a look at how many square tiles will cover this rectangle. So if I lay them out in a row, side by side with no gaps and no overlaps, we would see that we have 1 row of 4 at this point. If I continue this pattern and I lay down another 4 tiles, again making sure that there are no gaps and no overlaps, we would have 2 rows of 4, which is 8. 3 rows of 4 is going to be 12. 4 rows of 4 will be 16. 5 rows of 4 is going to be 20, and we continue to add another group of 4, and 6 rows of 4 is going to be 24. So I have 4 tiles in each row, and I have 6 rows of those tiles. So when I think about what is my multiplication equation? Well, I have 6 rows with 4 tiles in each row, and that gives me 24 square units, or 24 square tiles in this particular case. So if I were going to look on a number line, or look at a pattern, I would count 6 groups of 4, and that would give me 24 if I were using my multiples to help me with my product. Let's take a look at some more ideas and more examples. So this idea of multiplication for area tells us that when we count the total square units, that's our product. Our rows in this case are the factor. The squares in each row is our other factor. So we can write multiplication equations to find area of a surface. So let's look at using square tiles or square units to find the area. So you need a grid, and we have, let's say these are centimeters, for example. So I have 5 rows of squares, and I have 7 in each row. So I could break that up as 3 rows of 7, and that would give me 7 plus 7 plus 7. But I'm not through with my array yet because why? I need 5 rows of 7. So right now I'm at 21 square units. But if I take another 2 times 7, I could add 7 and 7 more, and that would give me my 2 rows of 7. Now I have 5 rows with 7 in each row. And now I can take what I know about 3 times 7, which is 21, and add 14 more. So if I add 14 more to 21, I would get 35. Now, that's not just the only way that I could break up this array to help me find my product or my area. I could also break it up as 4 rows of 7, and that would give me 28. And I could add another row of 7. Now I have my 5 rows of 7, and if I add 7 more to 28, that would give me 35. Notice my number of square units is not changing, just my strategy on how to find the total square units. So you can see that overall, the total square units that this rectangle would cover is 35. So I have 5 rows with 7 in each row. Let's take another example. So we need our grid, and now we're going to look at 6 rows with 6 tiles in each row. Again, there are many different ways that we could take a look and take this apart and make this maybe easier or user-friendly to figure out. If we don't know what 6 times 6 is, we could use 3 rows of 6, and that would be 6 plus 6 plus 6. And together, those would be or equal to 18. So right now we have 18 square units, but it wants 6 rows with 6 in each. So now we're going to take and add another 6 rows with another 6 in each row. So again, we would add 3 more groups of 6, and we know from the above array that we have 18. So if I add 18 and 18 more, that would give me 36 square units. And we could say centimeters since we may want to use centimeters in this particular case. Now, I could also look at it this way. Let's take 4 rows of 6, and 6 plus 6 is 12, and 6 plus 6 is 12. And together, those would be 24. However, if I add another 2 rows of 6, now I have my 6 rows of 6. So what I've basically done is I've taken an array that I know quickly and added another array to that to make my 6 rows with 6 in each row. So if I add another 12, because 6 plus 6 is 12, that would give me my 36 square units. So 36 square units is still our area. I'm just using a strategy of taking the array apart into smaller chunks to help me find my product or my area. We could also take 5 groups of 6, and that would be 30, because if we count by 5s, which would be your columns, we would know quickly that it would be 30. and another row of 6 added to 30 would be 36. So that rectangle, or in this particular case, it's a square, because squares actually can be rectangles, but that's for another lesson. We have 6 rows and 6 squares in each row, and that would give us 36. So now let's take a look at an example of a story problem. Noah laid the floor tiles in a 5 feet length by a 5-foot width. So 5 foot in length and a 5 foot in width. So it's 5 rows with 5 squares in each row. How many square feet of tile did he lay? So if we take what we know about multiplication, we have 5 rows and 5 squares in each row, and that in this case gives us 25 square feet. So 5 rows with 5 squares in each row will give us 25, and we have 25. So our multiplication equation would be 5 times 5, so it would be 25 square feet. Ronnie's grandpa laid the floor tiles in a 7 foot in length by a 7 foot in width. How many square feet of tiles did he lay? So again, if we were to take 7 rows and 7 squares in each row, we would count each of those square tiles and we could find the area. Now, of course, we can break this apart into simpler arrays because not everybody knows right now what 7 times 7 is. So most people know what 7 times 5 is though. If I have 5 rows with 7 squares in each row, that gives me 35. And most people know what 2 times 7 is, which would be 2 rows with 7 squares in each row. And when I take the 35 tiles from the above array and I have the 14 tiles from the below array, I know that when I take my 2 rows and my 5 rows, now I have my 7 rows with 7 squares in each row. So when I add 35 and 14, I'm going to get 49 square feet. As a multiplication problem, that would be 7 times 7 equals 49. So now we're going to take a listen to another person's perspective on how to find area. So let's take a listen.
Hello, Mrs. Cavazos here. Today you will learn how to determine the area of rectangles. Let's start off with 1 unit square. A unit can be centimeters, inches, feet, or any other form of measurement. Looking at this rectangle, we can count 4 unit squares as its length and 2 unit squares as its width. Area equals length times width. So 4 times 2 equals 8 unit squares. Let's count the unit squares going across this square. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's start with the first unit square again and count going down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The length is 5 and the width is 5. So 5 times 5 equals 25 units squared. You can count the unit squares of a game board. You can practice using blocks. You can even count tile. That concludes our math lesson for today. See you next time.
So now that we've had a chance to take a look at another teacher's perspective, we can go ahead and look at part of our practice for today. So our practice for today is you are going to need your square tiles from your blue folder. They should be in a small plastic envelope. Get 12 square tiles and arrange your square tiles using different widths and lengths. So that means you're going to create rectangles and or squares using square tiles with rows and the number of tiles in each row. but you cannot create a rectangle or square that has more than 12 tiles in it. So the question is, how many different ways can you arrange the 12 tiles to create a rectangle or square, and what would the multiplication sentence be if you were going to create a product for that area? You are going to record your findings on the grid paper in your packet. Be sure to label the length and the width and write an addition and multiplication sentence to go with your arrays of 12 tiles. So, for example, you might have 2 rows of tiles with 6 square tiles in each row. Now I can write an addition sentence with 6 plus 6, and I can also write a multiplication sentence with 2 times 6 equals 12. And we know it's going to be 12 because we know that we already have our total square tiles. So 2 times 6 equals 12. So pause here for now and arrange your square tiles in as many different arrangements as you can and record them on your grid paper. This is going to be number 1 on your grid paper. So pause now and arrange them in a couple of maybe different ways that you So let's take a look at your assignment for today. You're going to be in your hardback Envisions book on page 346 and 347. Listen carefully as I explain the instructions.
Hi, third grade. I'm going to go over your assignment real quick. We are going to be on page 346 and 347. We are going to be looking at how to find area using standard units, which is our square units. We want to know how many squares it takes to cover the surface or the top of an array. And in this case, we're going to look at our first problem. You're going to use the grid paper that you were using before, and you're going to copy the array onto your paper. Notice here I have 4 rows. So I have my 4 rows down. And I have my 3 square tiles in each row going across in my width. So my length is my 4 rows, and my width is my 3 tiles in each row. You're also going to record an addition sentence to go with your array, which is you're trying to find your square units. And you are going to also write a multiplication sentence with your array. It's going to be the number of rows multiplied by the number of squares in each row, which would be in this case 3. You're going to do problems 1 through 13. You'll notice that on 11, 12, and 13, it asks you to use the picture at the right, which looks like a diagram of a garden. Be sure to carefully read each question, and also you are going to record your answers on your grid sheet for these particular problems as well. So, if you have any questions, please make sure to write to me in the chat on Schoology or in your email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I hope you have a great day and keep up the good math work.